So my name is Shannon McFarland. I'm the director of content here at Securicy. And today I've got here with me our CEO of Securicy, Darren Gallop. Today, rather than talking about information security so much, we're really focused on getting Darren to put his business strategy and CEO hat on as an experienced person who has a lot to say about that can be really helpful for people who are thinking about managing cash flow in a really uncertain business environment right now. So really looking at how can you buy time for your business to weather the pandemic, trying to figure out what to do with your money when if you're having to put your business into hibernation, or looking at what expenses you can cut and what can you not cut, and really answer some questions that people are having about running your business today. So Darren, would you like to give yourself a little bit more of an introduction as to why we're talking about this today?
Cool. Awesome. So yeah, thank you very much, Shannon. My name's Darren. I'm the CEO of Securicy. I've been an entrepreneur or an executive director, CEO for about the last 24 years. I've worked in businesses from like super small, as in like just me, right up to, more sort of like 25 size businesses, education space, music festival space, event space. So kind of been through quite a bit. More recently, I'm in the information security space with Securicy. Over the years, I've had a business go out of business. I've had a business navigate through a recession. I've built a business, actually had a business go out of business during a recession while I started a new business, or during a recession in 2007, 2008. I've had two companies that I sold. One was very small. The other one was a bit of a life changer. I've had scenarios where I've just had, like micro failures in business where you sort of overestimate that you're going to raise a certain amount of money, or that you are, going to meet certain sales targets, or certain things are going to work in a way that they don't. So I've gone through the process of laying off, 20% or 25% of your payroll in one fell swoop. So, I've been through quite a few tough times, some good times as well, but certainly, when it comes to looking at challenges and sort of readapting plans and reassessing plans and communicating, changes in your business, I have quite a bit of experience. So I figured I'd, use some of that to see if I can provide some value to everybody. So I'll walk through sort of, a few concepts or a few ways of looking at the options and how you can think about sort of navigating COVID-19 strategy, or the COVID-19 challenges and adversity that we're facing now. And then, I'll try not to burn up too much time. I'll keep it fairly high level. And then, what I think would be great is like, if anybody has any specific questions, and I can dive in a little bit more. So in terms of, the sort of looking at the predicament and thinking about your business, I think like the most important thing that you need to establish is gaining an honest understanding of what is the predicament that your business is in. And so in a situation like this, it's kind of like, what are you coming into it with? What's the viability on the other end look like? Looking at different scenarios. I think that, you're going to see businesses, and I've seen this happen. I've seen businesses go out of business already. And, so obviously certain spaces and certain types of businesses are hit more severely than others. And, there's businesses that have already been in a tough predicament. Maybe they have high debt, or they're not really in a great position to raise capital, and they have a high burn rate, or they, haven't hit that product market fit. And this is just going to be something that's just too much for them to get through. I've seen that. It's obviously a tough one. You see businesses hibernating. So, sort of leaving the tech space a little bit. I've seen companies out there that are just, they can't really do anything right now. So I've seen like hair salons and, firms like that, or people in the tourism industry, in the music space, that are going into full hibernation. So in that case, it's sort of like they're not really closing their business permanently, but they have to go into this mode of shutting down the business, and then, preparing for how they'll come back to business. And then there's businesses that are going to be able to continue to go through that, but that are going to have, substantial, cut to their top line. So they're going to lose revenue, they're going to lose customers, or they're not going to have access to new customers in the same way. So they're, if they're not properly capitalized, or if they don't have a lot of runway on their hands, then they generally are going to have to look at cost cutting measures. We'll dive into each one of these a little deeper. And then, there's the opportunities that exist out there for some companies to reposition or pivot. So, I've seen a few cases where companies, I'll give you an example. I spoke with a CEO that had a company that was manufacturing one product that had relevance in the pre-COVID-19 sort of world. And then their industry got hit really, really heavily. And then they moved on to building parts for the medical industry to help with this crisis. So they found a new opportunity. They were able to reposition or pivot their product, at least for the short term, to be able to stay in business and maintain operational. I've seen others where they've taken a technology that they have and just repurpose it to be more specific. And we actually did a little bit of that ourselves. We've done a little bit of, we've done some cost cutting, and we've done some repositioning. So I'll talk a little bit more of that as well. The first thing I think you need to do when you're sort of like going through the process of understanding your predicament, you have to run scenarios in your cash flow budget. So I'm operating under the assumption that you have a proper spreadsheet or tool that manages your cash flow, and that in that tool you have the ability to push some different scenarios through. So this was like one of the first things we did. We took our cash flow budget and we started doing scenarios, and like we'd look at things like, what if this lasts for 3 months? What if this lasts for 6 months? What if this lasts for 12 months? And then, also we would run scenarios varying the different amounts of, like, the different levels of impact to sales. So what if we have no sales? I mean, obviously that's like the worst case scenario. So we ran that, like, when do we run out of money based on that? What if we are 25% of what we expected, 50%, and then we sort of like concluded to what we thought was likely, like maybe this is going to last 6 or 8 months and we'll have like a hit here, but we'll figure out some things with our pivot. And, we sort of went through scenarios, and that exercise is really good because it helps you have a model of understanding. And obviously, like, as time goes, you'll start to have a little bit more information and hopefully a bit more confidence in which of the scenarios are sort of evolving to be more likely. But having that understanding is really going to help you make decisions, and having, applying scenarios to actual math models and cash flow models that enable you to see, like, hey, do I run out of money in a week? Do I run out of money in 3 months? Do I run out of money in 12 months? And that's really important. So, I think once you have a sense of your predicament and a sense of sort of how you're going to go into it, communication is so important. And I think it's really important that you talk, not isolate yourself and try to deal with this yourself. You want to be in communication with your advisors, mentors, shareholders, employees, and customers as you're navigating, figuring out what the best scenario is. You'll get a lot of different perspective. You'll have the opportunity to find ideas. I mean, I've had conversations with shareholders that have great ideas. They won't always be great ideas, but certainly got a lot of great ideas and things that we've been able to implement. And it's just by communicating with people. It's generally anybody who's a stakeholder involved in your business. Like, communication is better than you hiding out, waiting for the perfect plan while they're wondering in the back of their heads what the hell's going on. And then, obviously government programs. So anything you can do to get more access to more capital is going to be helpful. So, certainly look at what government programs are available there. It's going to be different in every region, province, country, state, et cetera. So, I'm not going to dive into specific programs as such, but certainly be on top of that, and keep in mind that one consistent thing I see in government programs across across anywhere, whether it's looking at Nova Scotia, Ontario, Canada, or even in the US, is that all these government organizations that are looking to help businesses, they're operating in a predicament that they've never operated before. So first of all, they're operating way faster than they're used to. Government isn't really famous for its speed of execution. And they're moving faster. And so, and they're also remote working and all these types of things, which is also in a lot of governments aren't super developed in working from home and remote work. So, I think you want to not just, like, if you read the programs a week ago, Don't don't make that sort of be your mentality or your thought on what's available. Like, you got to monitor this stuff all the time because there's changes happening daily on all. Like, I'm hearing daily changes in the US, I'm hearing daily changes in Canada and the province of Nova Scotia, etc. So you want to keep, and again, communicating, making sure there's tons of people like that are talking about this stuff. You're talking to your bankers, talking to your if you have relationships with government organizations, like, just communicate and make sure that you're always being aware of what's available there. And if you have investors, so if you're a company that has taken on investors, whether it's bank or private equity or venture capital or angels, again, communicate with your investors, letting them know what your predicament is and what you're doing, and sort of having that interactive conversation. I know for me, in that conversation, I've had investors offer up additional cash to us. So that's great to have that. You're more likely to have that cash by communicating regularly with investors than to just come pull the fire alarm when you're kind of like freaking out and you don't really have a great plan. Actually communicating and involving them in that is going to be very helpful. So that's kind of like, sort of high level walking through it. I'm going to dive a little deeper into a couple of things that, I've talked to entrepreneurs that are dealing with. And so I'm not going to get too much into the going out of business side. That's a whole topic in its own, and has like legal ramifications and accounting ramifications and emotional ramifications. And it's a fairly big topic, but, hibernation is one that I've seen quite a few cases of. And, again, in that case, like, moving fast, communicate clearly, transparently, and respectfully to all your stakeholders. So making sure that your team, like, people are going to understand, most reasonable people are going to understand that if you are paying them for business that is, say, for example, doing tours of a national park. Well, national parks are closed. So, it's not realistic for them to think that things are going to move in another direction. And I think when you have to do this hibernation thing where you're basically like temporarily shutting down, having really good, clear communication with your customers, with your investors, and most of all, I even say like your employees, and be respectful of that pain. And anything you can do, like if there's anything you can do to equip your employees to make the transition from being paid to work for you to going and taking advantage of whatever programs of unemployment or whatever other programs that they may be available in your region. I think having that information on the program is really helpful. Making sure you can give them some guidance, so you're actually helping them, navigating them to the right websites, the right phone numbers, or whatever that method in your region would be. And then being moving as quickly as you can with any documentation, like records of employments or whatnot like that. And then I think, like, once you do that initial hibernation, where you really want to start strategizing, because providing your home now and your business is in hibernation and all your employees are laid off, or most of your employees are laid off waiting for the return. I think you start thinking about that return and planning for that return. And one of the things that I'm seeing people do that's really genius is like an example would be like a hair salon that's doing workshops on how to cut your own hair. And any ways that you can communicate with your customers and build relationship, and try to find ways to maintain your relevance, maintain your communication, and find ways to be helpful to your customers. I've even seen cases where people have find ways to monetize. So it's kind of like they're hibernating their business, but at the same time they've realized that they have stock that they can sell. So they've packaged up hair, like, for example, hair products that they can package up and sell at good rates, or deliver whatever. You just got to think, like, every business is different, but thinking about, like, you don't want to go into hibernation for 6 months and have no communication with the employees you've laid off and the customers that you have. So you want to try to think and look at what other people are doing and get some ideas, and just try to maintain your relevance and plan for when we can go back, and when you will be able to start opening up your business again. And being prepared for that is going to be super helpful. Cutting costs. The analogy that I've heard that I really like the best when you talk about cost cutting is sort of the analogy of like fat, muscle, and bone. And so, like, trimming the fat would be the idea of, like, a lot of times when you are forced to actually sit down and look at all the things you spend money at, I try to do this once a year, just in general. And every time I do it, I find stuff that we're like, wow, why are we paying like $800 a month for this thing? We barely use it, right? So you find these scenarios where you're kind of wasting money. Or you may find like you may have employees that are not really, that have been underperforming for a long time, that you've just been sort of like not wanting or not really had the confidence, or trying to avoid, because obviously nobody with a conscience enjoys letting people go. So you may identify in your business opportunities where you can cut costs, where it wouldn't have a negative effect on your business. And you know it's same thing, like if you're not using your office, you can actually negotiate potentially with your landlord, to reduce costs. So cutting costs isn't always turning a service off. We actually went to some of our service providers and said, hey, like, we pay you this much, we've been a customer for X, we are struggling and we're not going to be able to use this tool in the same way. And you can negotiate discounts or short-term discounts and things like that. So like having those conversations with vendors. So if you look at your list of vendors and your list of costs and you remove anything that you don't need, if there's things that you do need but there's substantial costs, you may be able to negotiate or figure out a way to reduce that cost. And so I'd really recommend thinking about it that way and having conversations with those vendors and let them know. I mean, at the end of the day, they understand you're in the predicament and they want to have you as a long-term customer as well. And then, so talking about the reposition and pivot, and really, it's not like you have to pick one of these three things: hibernation, cutting costs, or reposition, pivot. You can actually do like any combination or all of these. So an example was you might have a business component that is in person, that, where it's that has to hibernate, that business function has to hibernate until things change. And, you still have an opportunity to cut costs. It's always a great experience to cut costs. It's always something that'll make your business stronger. But then, thinking about that reposition, once you've done all the other things you can, repositioning is something that a lot of companies are looking at and a lot of companies are doing right now. The few things that I will say is, the first one is it's really tough to reposition into something that you don't have expertise. So we're a software company, for example. So our repositioning was, we already do stuff around business continuity and disaster planning. We already do a lot of stuff that's part of normal business practices in cybersecurity to make sure that work from home policies, and that there's ways that employees can be aware to configure their networks in a more secure way or use VPNs. We have all this experience, but we haven't previously, we haven't really emphasized it that much, because most of our customers are having sort of a different sort of frame up of why they come to it, and that's a component. Whereas now we're in a situation where disaster recovery or business continuity is a relevant term, and working from home. There's lots of companies that were not working from home previously that are able to continue to operate, but doing so in a work from home environment. So we've just repositioned some of our language, and we relaunched our free tool and made it all about organizational resilience, and really giving a couple of those tools that we've already had, and some of the things we vamped up for our customers. We just made this little package that we could put out there, and that's just something we gave out for free. But we're also selling a more advanced version of that to the companies that have capital, that are moving or pivoting themselves into areas that require certain requirements. So we've actually been able to change some of our messaging, but we're not going outside of our area of expertise, which makes it easy to both A, do it, and B, to actually do it with quality, right? We're not going to start trying to figure out how to make respiration, making masks. I have no idea how to make masks. So by the time I figured out how to do that, I'm sure all the other organizations that have that knowledge or are more close to that sort of business will have reacted and done so themselves. So, staying within your wheelhouse, but explore if you look at all of the things you do and look at how does that thing that you can do that you're already positioned to be able to do, how can that be effective? Or is there certain verticals or markets or sub niches in markets that could use that help? How can you, in a lot of cases, like in our case, we didn't actually make a lot of software. We just really sort of focused on language and beefed up a couple of sort of components of our software. So I think, thinking about it like that is a really good way to do it. So I'm gonna pause because I've just been talking since the beginning of this webinar, and like I'm gonna take a break and see, if Shannon, if there's anything that I missed that you want me to speak about in more context, and then certainly if there's any questions that anybody who's attending the webinar, would like a bit more insight on.
Perfect. Yeah, we have some time for some questions. We don't have too many in the Q&A so far. So if you do have questions that you want answers to that relate to your own business and what the challenges that you're going through in your industry, or particularly with your team, start dropping those into the Q&A. I think one of the big questions that a lot of people are trying to figure out, and you kind of got into this a little bit earlier, Darren, is how long is this going to last? What is the time frame, and how can businesses respond when, as we're all asking this question, we all know that there's no good answer?
Yeah, I mean, there's absolutely no good answer. There's all kinds of different models and scenarios and possibilities, and I think it's important to like stay, again, like I think this is a time, and this is one of the things we did with our team right off the get-go, is say, hey, we want everybody to give themselves a little bit more time every week to read and stay aware of what's happening in our industry, what's happening with the COVID-19 predicament in general. And just, it's important for us because things are changing in this crisis. It's really compressed the rate of change at which our environment changes. So therefore, if you're already spending an hour a week making sure that you maintain relevance in your field, well, now if we're saying things change 2 or 3 times as fast, well, then if you want to maintain relevance, you need to spend more time. So I think it's really important that people keep watching and looking at the models. Generally, my sense on it is, it looks like, there's COVID-19, and there's having a grasp on what's happening there. And then there's the economic impacts. And, we talk about the economic impacts. They're not linear in every industry, right? So like when I'm talking to entrepreneurs who, like, I talked to people in February that were going out of business, that were like seeing their business crumble because, and I'll give you an example, the event space. I've talked to people that are in the festival or the event space that really was a space that was seeing the hits early. I mean, we saw the big mobile expo, I forget the name of the event, in Spain was canceled in January. So for a lot of people saw that event get canceled, and they didn't really even know what, coronavirus at the time was, the term everyone was using. They didn't really know what the hell it was even about at that point. So, like that industry was getting hit really quickly. And I know, like for us, like we went to RSA conference in February. And we, like the week before we left, IBM dropped out, and then AT&T dropped out. And so, we almost dropped out ourselves. In the end, we decided to go and practice, is certain hygiene practices to be a little more conscious. In the end, it ended up being discovered that there were 3 people at the event that had it, and one of them ended up in intensive care. So, like, the thing is, I think you have to look at is there's also industries that haven't been affected. So there's like people like, hey, I was listening to a guy say, oh, our Q1 was perfect. We didn't have a dip at all. It's like, well, you like that, like, don't get too excited about that, because like everything, like the impact effect is a ripple effect. So there's businesses that are really not going to start feeling the impacts financially. Like they're going to feel it more in Q2, some that are going to feel it more in Q3. And then like there's also the effects that can likely happen to certain industries. There's industries that may not come back. I mean, Eventbrite laid off more than half its staff. They announced that this morning as an example, right? This is a fairly large company that most people know. Some of the events that have canceled are not in a predicament at this point, at least financially, where they're going to be able to just, we'll just do the event next year, all be good. Like there's going to be industries that are going to have ramifications that are going to last different time frames. So I think, when I talked a little bit earlier about talking about people in your space, talking to your friends in the space, your customers, your competitors, your investors, like having conversations with people and hearing what they're saying and like getting more information is really critical. And if you're the leader of business, you have to be dedicating a lot of your time right now on staying aware and communicating so that you're able to think about and sort of analyze. What we did is we really looked at a longer predicament. Like we, hope, like I say, like it'd be awesome if in 3 months from now we get this thing under control. I think that's very optimistic. We've sort of looked at our strategy of how we manage cash and how we plan and budget for thinking more long term and thinking like a longer pace there. So like our goal is to have 18 months of budget based on 50% of our projected financial revenue. So we're saying like over the next 18 months, if we were to have a half of our expected revenue not happen, are we able to survive? And so that's the model when we're like going back to our investors, where it's like, hey, we don't think this is going to be what happens. This is what we think is going to happen, but this is what we want to plan for. And most like intelligent or like good investors are like, well, they're going to respect that you have a plan and you're working towards something better, but that you're also like prepared for it to not work necessarily as you plan. So, that for us, that was helpful in getting more capital injected into the company from current investors. So, I don't have a crystal ball, and I don't think there's any one profession that is more like poised to be able to have a better, like, oh, that person's from the medical professional, so they can tell you when this is going to be over. It's really not that case. I mean, there's so many factors involved. There's, beyond just the biology of the actual, of the virus itself. There's the social impacts, there's the economic impacts, there's how markets are going to evolve. It's going to be how business changes. Like, if everybody's stuck at home for 6 months, do you think everyone's going to want to just go back to work? Like, this is going to change some things in a way that will never return ever to the way they were. There's changes that were happening already culturally in workplace culture that will now codify themselves to being established change that will not revert. Some for better, some for worse. And so I think, this is why it's really critical to constantly be maintaining that awareness of the situation and communicating a lot, especially as a business leader, and always reassessing your business as you see the evolution of this situation.
So I think one of the challenges that a lot of people and businesses are facing is this is a situation where it's overwhelming, things are happening very quickly, it's very stressful, but at the same time, there's a big need for, as you were saying, creative solutions for how do you respond to this changing environment? How do you figure out what can your business still provide as a business? How do you do this? And so as business owners, the question here is, how can we really make sure that we have space to come up with creative solutions and figure out ways that we can adapt to, as you said, this completely changing environment?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to revert back to the communication. So, communication with your clients, your customers, is a very. I always believe that a lot of value and some of our best learnings as entrepreneurs or business leaders comes from the conversations we have with the customer. And I think like looking at what other adjacent industries are doing, how great leaders in other companies are reacting, looking at how your competition is acting in a time like this, and like talking to your advisors and investors. And I mean, there's no magic sort of solution to how do you like turn lemons into lemonade in this predicament. It's you just have to dedicate time to seeing, watching, reading, communicating. And in that is like, that's where our ideas came from. We were looking at what do our customers need, and like how does that, like what's going on in our customers' business, like because you got to think like every organization is looking at cost cutting, right? So everyone's thinking about cutting costs. So like, what is your value to your customer while they're in the process? And this is especially relevant if you're going through, if you're in a B2B side, but it's also relevant if you're B2C. If you've got, your customers are making 10 grand, let's say a month, and now they're on a government program that's giving them 2 grand a month. then that's going to change their buying habits, right? So, you have to establish, like, is your value proposition as it is presented now, as it is being, as it is assumed and being consumed by your customer, post this, like now that you're in COVID-19, does that value, is your value proposition still putting you on the list of necessary versus nice to have? And I think that's, that's really why I would always say that customer conversation is the absolute most valuable conversation.
Yeah, and I think that point about the customer having a lot of these conversations is really key too, because it really comes back to that entrepreneurial mindset of saying, what are the problems that people are having and where are there lacking solutions right now? Because we have a whole lot of problems in this environment right now that we sure did not have a month or even 2 months ago. And that leaves a lot of room for really helping people with new problems that are emerging. So I think that's really, really key there.
I
So
mean,
as
we saw a company, like, just to give you an extreme case, like on one side, I talked to somebody who laid off almost 80 employees. And then the next day I talked to somebody who closed a fairly significant funding round in about 72 hours, which I don't, this is, VenCap world. If you look at average VenCap world deal closing timelines to close a round, it's usually around 6 months, and can involve talking to hundreds of people. So, there's really extreme situations. Somebody nailed a pivot and a strategy, and it was so compelling that there was people like wanted in right then and there. So this is a company that, like, literally is in a significantly better financial predicament than they would have been, but they were before this, and that they would still, that wouldn't have happened without them doing the pivot, which is entirely because of what's going on right now. So there's definitely cases that I'm seeing out there where people are able to find a way to reposition or to pivot, and they're able to, monetize that really quickly and grow their company, which, like, nobody wants to sit there and go, oh, sweet, COVID-19, I'm just raised a couple of $1 million. But, don't think about it that way. Think about it this way. Like, the economy is in trouble right now in a big way. So if there's companies that can identify opportunities to grow and create employment, that is so positive for the economy as a whole, on a national or, international level, but also in your region. So, like, you got to think, like, how many people in your town or city are now unemployed? If there was something that your business could do that could employ those people, or employ any portion of those people, that's helpful for those people, for their families. It puts them in a position to help others, and it's just overall good for your local economy. So, there's nothing we can do, and aside from if you have the ability to go lock yourself in the basement and come up with a vaccine for this, there's really nothing we can do to make this problem go away. So if you can figure out a way to make your business succeed or even grow in this situation, it is only positive for everybody if you can do that.
Yeah, and I think the question that you were asking, that you and our co-founder of Securicy, Laird Wilton, were asking at the beginning of this, we were all looking around going, what can we do to help? And that was, I think, one of the biggest questions that helped spur some of that creativity that in our business helped us come up with several of the solutions that we were lucky enough to be able to offer for free, knowing that businesses are really in need of them right now, and we had the resources to do that. But that started by looking around and saying, hey, what are the problems our customers having? What do they need? What do we have that we can offer? And so it was this real question of how can we help? And I think that was a really good question that was able to spur some really creative thinking here.
Yeah, and I mean, like, it's not the leader's job to always find the magical solution. I think a lot of leaders and a lot of entrepreneurs gravitate that way. What's the leader's job is to create, like, to unify the team and to leverage what's there. So, like, I could sit there and try to think about what our customers need and what we can do to navigate this predicament. Or I can get the 18 people on the team to also be thinking that way. And then everybody can throw their ideas in, and, in an environment where like, we'll be honest, but we're vulnerable. If your idea sucks, then, like, no one's going to home cry about it. And at the end of the day, what's important for a leader to do is, what's the best idea? Who gives a shit who came up with the idea? That's irrelevant. Like, if, whoever has the idea, that's awesome. But really, like, leadership is taking that best idea and then aligning the team and then executing on that idea, right? And measuring and tracking and tweak it if it needs to be tweaked, and rinse, repeat, and just keep going, right? So, having that, the communication is so important. And it's like, ideas come from conversations. People's different people, like the idea of diversity, like having, I'm talking about diversity. I don't mean like your ethnical background or your race. I'm talking about diversity in thought. So people that have different ways of thinking, or that come from, that come from different industries, or that have experienced different things, have different ways of thinking than you. And those conversations with that diversity is just so powerful, and it'll help you expand your mind out of sort of like the bubble, which is the way your business was before this predicament. So I think it's just so critical to have these conversations and stimulate that creativity.
Yeah, and I think there's a comment here and a bit of a question. So a comment from the audience is about the need to think collectively, and this being a strong difference from SARS and 9/11. And I think really and there's kind of a follow-up question on this, is the so one of the biggest challenges right now is we can't respond in some of the ways that we have in the past collectively, where we gather, where we show up in person. And so it's really this, how do we stay apart and still learn to take collective action and grow together as a community through this?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a great reason why Zoom has had so much so much growth in their user base. Is, I mean, before now, I very rarely would sit down and have a beer with my buds over a webcam meeting, right? But these are the things we're all doing. We had trivia last week with some of our relatives, and hung out, basically, like, just set up the webcam and some lights, and set ourselves all up and collaborate it that way. I think like, the internet's a really good thing. If they turn the internet off right now, we're really in trouble. But I think that there's ways that you can communicate together as a group through social media, through generating groups in social media environments, from having webinars or presentations or recording video. And we can still communicate, and we can still rally together using the tools that are out there. This is forcing a lot of people that only made sort of like quasi use of technology to like kind of reinvent their social life, and just become more aware with how to use technology and leverage it that way. So, obviously we can't all make signs and go, march down the street and have a parade, but we can do things, creatively, using social media and using video and audio and webinars, podcasts, and things like that, to move messages around. I think, like, like when you think about like 9/11, it was more, it had obviously a much more drastic effect on, first of all, New York City. I mean, it's kind of like the building, New York City, New York State, the US, North America, the world. I mean, as you get further away, it was more of like, hey, we're supporting them. Their tough times. This is very different, because like almost the entire planet is pretty much in the same predicament here. So this is very much we're all in it together. Much more so than any war. Like on wars, there's sides. I mean, right now we're all, humanity on the planet is on the side of, let's get rid of this virus. I mean, at one point somebody posted a message that was shared, that of an internal communication of ISIS, talking about like exactly the same thing that our politicians are telling Canadians and the Americans to do. And so I'm not saying that we should be celebrating our alignment with ISIS or the Taliban, but I'm just saying, like, this is a scenario where like we are literally all in it together in a way that's much larger than anything I've experienced in my time.
Yeah, I think that's definitely right. There's no sides when we're really all in this place where regardless of who you are and where you are, we're all having to respond in similar ways, which is a whole new challenge for humanity as we're seeing it.
Yeah.
So it's some heavy stuff, for sure. So on that, so we have just another couple of minutes here. So I want to, if anyone else has a final question, we've got a couple of minutes and there's some space. I don't have a next question here from the audience that I need to get to. If you want to put those in, feel free, please drop those in there. And so really the final question here, if we don't get another one, I think the big question here, to bring it back around to cash management, is how do you try to really save up and try to figure out how do you build up the cash reserve so that you can reopen? How do you figure out how much do we need to save for an opening day, or to be able to get back online to really start doing that, and try to figure out, in a lot of ways, basically how to restart a business?
Yeah, I mean, it's really all sort of looking at the cost cutting, definitely the budgeting. So you should have a really good budget tool. And my definition of good is something that you know how to use, that you can make changes in quickly, and it works. I've seen so many businesses that have these, expensive accountants build these like crazy models that, the entrepreneur's afraid to do anything to, because if they break it, it's like, we're done. I can't use this, right? So there certainly are business models that require a certain level of complexity, but as an entrepreneur, like, you should be able to play with some form of financial model that has a reasonable amount of accuracy to it, but that you can actually use to assess. And if you don't have that, I'll highly encourage you to do that. So yeah, that's a big one for sure.
Right.
But like I say, every business is so different that it's really hard. It's really hard to give, like, the advice I would give to a tech startup that, I mean, I've seen tech startups that are going into hibernation, but like their cost of maintaining their application, especially with less activity in it, is really low. So, I mean, their business is still kind of open for the few people that need to use it. It's just a question of messaging, and then figuring out how are you going to bring your employees back and hopefully not lose them. And so those pains are different than like the salon that shuts down their business entirely and then has to, reserve cash flow to figure out and maintain some costs, because hibernation, you're trying to reduce your costs the most possible, but there's still going to be very likely business costs of keeping certain things alive, like that you just have to pay for. So thinking about that, but like, even if you have loans, you go talk to your bank, there might be interest relief or payment relief. Like, again, it's those same exercises of talking to the people and negotiating yourself into a predicament that your business model, your financial model, allows you to still have cash if you reopen in 3 months, 6 months, 8 months, 12 months. Thinking again, what does it take to survive each scenario is really helpful. It gives you an idea of like how much cost needs to be cut, or how much extra capital do you need to access.
Awesome. Yeah, I think these are some really, really good tips, and some things that I think are on the minds of everyone in business right now, really trying to understand, where do we spend money, where do we save, and how do we get to a point that we are ready to open the moment that things are starting to open up, and really get things, if not back to normal, because as we say, as we're saying today, the next normal is going to be definitely different than what we're used to. And so it's going to take a lot of paying attention to where things are going and how people are adjusting and what their needs are in the future.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like they're going to come out someday and go, all right, everything's back, go back, pack your shit up, go back to work. It's not going to happen that way.
Yeah.
Some things are going to go back to normal. Some things are going to go back to a new normal. Some things might not come back at all. And just every industry and every vertical is going to have some differences in sort of what they experience and when they experience these things. So, like I say, talk to people. It's a really, like, you got to keep educated on this rapidly changing predicament and how it's going to affect your business and your people and your customers.
Absolutely. All right. Well, let's wrap things up. Thank you so much for everyone who attended today and who was here for this webinar, offering your good questions and really participating in this giant conversation we're all having about how we all move forward. All right. Thank you, Darren.
Thank you. Take care, everybody. Stay safe out there.